friends, Tiffany here. Welcome to my quilting life. So in today's video, we are going to make a scrappy quilt. Yes, we are going to play with scraps, and I have loads of them. This whole shelf right behind me filled with pre-cut scraps. And that's what we're going to be using today is scraps that are pre-cut, or you can cut your own to follow along with today's video. The quilt that we are making is called 4-Patch Plus. It is a pattern that I designed that I will verbally, visually give to you for free. Why? Because it's an easy to follow along video, and I hope you like it. So let's get to what we need to make today's quilt. So the first thing that you're going to need to make today's quilt project is background. We need 2 3/4 yards. That's 2 3/4 yards of a background color. I would suggest a white, cream, white on white, tone on tone, something that's a light color, or depending on all your scraps, you could use black, but white will probably show the best, or a light color. I'm going to just use this cream 2 3/4 yards of a cream. The next thing is, obviously you saw my heavy tubs of scraps. Now I pre-cut all my scraps purposely for projects like today's. So we're going to need, and we're going to start with what I put on the bottom. Darn, oh, look at that. Okay. Now some of you are going to hate me, and you can replace this with a 1.5, but for today's 4-Patch Plus, the reason why it's a 4-Patch Plus is because of the sizes that we use. So we need 1-inch squares. A lot of people don't like working with 1-inch squares, but you'll see in the end that this works. But if you want to replace the 1-inch, you'll be skipping a step and moving on to 1.5 inch. But for those of you who love working with little pieces, and or you just want to give it a try, 1-inch squares, and we're going to need 240, that's right, 240 1-inch squares. That's a lot of squares, right? The next thing, oh, see, well, I stacked them from the bottom. You know, you would think that I would have thought better than that. The next thing you're going to need is that other second magic number, 1.5 inch. Okay, so you could skip your ones. You'll see when we start making the quilt. And notice I'm saving it till the very end of this video. So 1.5 inch. You're going to need 240 1.5 inch squares. Next is 2.5 inch squares. Now I have 3 tubs, because they're just all mixed in here, of 2.5 inch squares, and you're going to need 240 2.5 inch squares. Slide that to the side. The last and final number is 4.5 inch. So you're going to need 240 4.5 inch squares. So that's 1 inch, 1.5 inch, 2.5 inch, and 4.5 inch. Notice there's like a neat plus number there. Okay, so just think about it. Think about it. You'll see. So we're going to go ahead now, and we're going to start with cutting up our yardage, because we need to turn those into, guess what? 1-inch squares, 1.5 inch squares, 2.5 inch squares, and 4.5 inch squares. Yep, and we're making, what did I say? 240 of the 1 inch. I'm looking over at my cheat sheet. And then 121.5, 122.5, and 124.5 inch. You know, this quilt is just loaded with squares, hence the name, is 4-Patch Plus. So, you know what we're making? We're going to cut a bunch of squares, and then we have to painstakingly count out 240 of each of these. And I'm going to make sure that all the colors I grab do not match this. So we don't want no light colors. We want everything that contrasts my background color. So that means I'm pulling yellows and blues and greens and reds and nothing that's white or tone on tone. So this is going to be fun. I'm going to cut the yardage first, then we'll do the squares because that's going to take a while. So let's get to it. Okay, starting with our yardage. We are going to open this up, nicely open it up, and we're going to make sure that the folds at the top of the yardage is on top of itself and it's perfectly lined up. And what I'm going to do is I'm kind of just going to fan fold this right here, and we're going to start with the biggest number. Now what I'm going to do is make sure that this fold is on a line, and then I'm also going to make sure that these sides over here are coming to any number on the board. You can see that this one's kind of off cut, so it's less, and we're just going to fold these over a line, and I'm going to use that 2 right there as my straightening line. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to make a nice straight cut right there to straighten this up. So I'm just going to line this up. We're going to make a nice straight cut to straighten the edge. And now I have a nice straight edge to start with. We are going to start with the biggest number first. We need 14, that's 14 4.5-inch strips. So I'm going to go ahead now and switch out to a different ruler that has a 4.5-inch. So here's my Quilter Select ruler, and it has the 1/2 inch on one side and not on the other. And we're going to line this up on the 4.5-inch, and I'm going to cut 14 4.5-inch strips. 14 4.5-inch strips. So there's 2 because I'm cutting at the fold. I have 2 folded over on top of themselves. There's 2, or 4 total now. That's 11, 12, and one more cut makes 14 4.5-inch strips. All right, just gonna line all that up. Okay. And now we're going to cut the next number. Before I subcut, we're just going to get all these strips cut. Now we are going to cut 8 2.5-inch strips. That's 8 2.5-inch strips. Everything's still folded nicely, still stacked on top of each other. So here's 1, 2. 7, 8. So that's 8. We cut 8 2.5-inch strips. I'm going to stack these up nicely because we're going to be subcutting as soon as we make all of our cuts. Now we're still folded over, so there's 2 layers at a time. Now we're going to cut 1.5-inch strips. We need 5 1.5-inch strips. So I'm just going to cut in 2s and then open it up. So here's 2. All right, there's that 5th 1.5-inch strip. We're just going to stack that out of the way. And now we are going to cut 6 1-inch strips. So I'm going to turn my ruler around because one side has half, the other side has whole. And we're going to cut 6 1-inch strips. And this is now being cut single. So there's one. Six 1-inch strips, and you can see that there's a little bit of fabric left over, and that's because I over measured when I cut it off the bolt. And there should be about, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches left, just so that in case you make a mess up cut, you have extra fabric. So I'm going to set that aside, and we are now going to subcut all this up. So we're going to start with these 1-inch strips because this was the last one we cut. I'm going to go ahead and line these up. I'm going to stack them as well. Just like this. They're so small, I know, but you can do it. You can do it. All right, 2 more. Not stacking them very thick because they're 1-inch and they tend to kind of like, not bow, but when you go to cut them, if you overstack on 1 inches, they kind of like fold to the side, so it becomes a crooked cut, and you definitely don't want that. So the less you stack, the better. Just a little tip for you. All right, we're going to go ahead now and just grab a small little ruler, and I'm going to go ahead and subcut all this down to make, guess what, 240 1-inch squares. It's actually going to yield 252, but we're just going to cut this out into 1-inch squares. So I'm just literally subcutting 1-inch squares. Again, you only need 240, but this yields 256 if you chop all this up. So you can slide them out of the way, or you can just keep stacking and going like this, lining it up and stacking. It feels like you'll be cutting forever. See what I mean? They start to get a little funky. All right, keep going. Keep going, keep cutting. Oh, there they went again. Because they're so small. And I'm going to make two more cuts. There we go. One more cut. Just trying to keep everything all nicely lined up. Okay, might as well move that out of the way because that's not going to work. This one wanted to slide on me. We definitely don't want that. Just line it up. Cut it. And one more right here. And look at that. All of my 1-inch squares are now chopped up. So we're going to go ahead now, and you can either stack them or you can just do this. Look at that. Beautiful. There we go. Right there. Now we're going to move on to 1.5. Same rule applies. The more you have stacked on these smaller ones, the more chances they kind of like just, I don't know, it's just the way they shift or something. Anyway, so we're going to go ahead now and we're going to cut 1.5-inch subcuts. And we cut 5 strips. And we're going to cut, you get 28 1.5-inch per strip. And we are going to yield ourselves 140 1.5-inch squares. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the selvage off. And we're going to cut 1.5-inch. My little Missouri star ruler has one side has solids, a 1-inch, and the other side starts with a half. So all I have to do is line it up on 1.5. And we're just going to chop all this up. Okay. Now we're just going to stack all these up. These are a little bit easier than the 1-inch pieces to stack. All right, our 1.5s are ready. Now for the 2.5s. Just going to bring them over here. We cut 8 strips, and now we're just going to subcut these 8 strips into 2.5 inch. My ruler here is 2.5 inches, so it's going to make it so much easier to cut. So I'm going to just start by getting rid of the selvage, and I'm just going to line my ruler up with the edge just like this, and here we go with 2.5 inch pieces. We should get about 128 because you get 16 per 1.5 and 2.5 inch strip. You'll get 16 squares on a full selvage to selvage strip. All right, just going to move those folds out of the way. And here we have all of our 2.5 inch squares. Well, that's a lot of squares, right? All right, now we're going to move on to our 4.5 inch. So you're going to get 9 4.5 inch pieces per cut. Let's come down a little bit. So per strip, you'll get 9 total. Okay, and that means we have to open at the fold to get that 9th piece. I was trying to make it easy on how many cuts that we're going to need for all of this. So we're going to yield ourselves 126 strips, but we only need 120 of them, but that's okay. So we cut 14 strips. We're going to get 9 per strip, and we're cutting 4.5 inch. So I'm going to start by lining my ruler up. I'm using my big ruler again. Go, cutting the selvage off. We're going to go ahead and now line up 4.5 inches right here, right there, making sure it's nice, and it is, and subcut. There we go. And we're just going to subcut all of this. All right, I'm going to stack all these out of the way because now we need to open these up and cut the fold. I'm just going to open them and stack them. You can press them if you need to. I'm not really going to worry about that at the moment. Just going to stack them all up and cut that one last square off of them all. Actually, I don't need these 6 pieces because you needed 100. It came out to 126, but technically we don't need those 6. So we're just going to cut 4.5 from these. I'm going to switch down to a different ruler, just like this. And I'm actually going to cut at the fold. So I'm going to go ahead now. That way the fold is in the middle and it doesn't land on an edge. So for now, I'm just going to cut those off. Turn it around. Cut 4.5. There we go. And that way it's easier to iron later. And 4.5. All right, so all those pieces, I'm just going to toss aside, and there is all of our pieces. Look at that. Whew! All the cutting is done, just like that. Super quick. Doesn't take too long. Well, at least for me it doesn't. All right, so now we're going to move on to counting out our squares. So let's move on to the 4.5 inch bin right here. And we are going to take out 240 different prints, or you can have repeats. It's up to you. We're going to count out 240, and we're going to pretend that's 240 right there. That probably isn't, but we're just going to pretend for now, and if we need more, we'll pull more out later. Set that aside. It looks like a big enough pile. Here's our 1.5s. Wait, this is going to take a while, so I'm going to put you in fast forward while I do this. Okay. Okay, so now I have yeah. I did cut these, but there's 240 1.5 inch squares. Move aside. Now we're going to go with 1 inch because I'm going to save the 2.5s for last. And I need to pull 240 1-inch squares. So, 1-inch squares. And actually, I don't think I'm going to even pull them out. I think I'm just going to pull from the bin. Just going to mix them up real good and just pull from the bin. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not even going to count these ones out. I'm just going to count out the 2.5 inch. That's what I'm going to do because I think if these are fully mixed, I can just pull as I go. So I'm just making sure that they're fully mixed up. And they are. They seem to be. As long as I'm not pulling the same ones over and over. And again, I'm avoiding anything that's really light because we want it to be contrasting in color to our background. So I'm just going to pull from the ones. So we're just going to throw those over there. Let's go to the 2.5 inch. I need 240 2.5 inch. 240 different ones. My goodness, we're just going to start grabbing. Here we go. See, so I don't want to use anything like this because this is too close to the cream. Even though it has stuff on the print, it's still too close to the cream. So we're going to avoid those colors. We're just going to start pulling. I'm trying to make sure that they're all different. So we're going to go ahead and pull from this container first. And I'm going to put it in fast forward while I do so. All right, so we're going to give you a run through real quick. You needed 2 3/4 background fabric. Those were subcut into 14 4.5-inch strips, subcut down to get 120, or you'll get 126, but you saw a little bit ago. You need 120 4.5-inch background squares. Then you need 8 strips of your background that are 2.5 inches, which will yield you 120 2.5-inch squares. Then you will need 5 strips that are 1.5 inch, and that will yield you 140, but you only need 120 backgrounds that are 1.5 inch. And then you need 6 1-inch strips, and you'll get 42 about, depending on your yardages with the fabric. You'll need 6 1-inch strips, but again, if you don't want to do 1 inch, you can add more to your 1.5. Oops, it's sticking to my finger. But anyways, you'll see when we start putting these blocks together. All right, so 1-inch squares, we needed 6 strips, and you need 240 1-inch squares that are your background. Then for your scraps, go ahead and cut yourself, or if you already have them cut, you need 240 4.5-inch squares. So here's 240 4.5. I really tried not to have repeats, but unfortunately, my 4.5s I didn't have a lot of, so I have quite a few repeats, but that's okay because, again, it's a scrappy quilt. Then you need 240 2.5-inch squares. So go ahead and cut 240 or pull from your stash if you have to, already pre-cut 2.5-inch squares. So there's that. And then you need 240 1.5-inch squares. So here's my disaster of 1.5-inch squares, and there's 240 here. Again, it's just a blend because some of these are the same as some of these, and some of these are the same as some of those, blah, blah, blah. And then you need 240 1-inch squares. I'm just going to leave mine in the tub and pull from it as I'm piecing. So hopefully you understood that. It's all on the screen. The numbers have all been shown on the screen. Hopefully you understood. Now let's finally get to piecing these blocks, because wow, did I just spend a lot of time counting 240 of everything. So let's get started sewing. Okay, so before we start sewing, I do want to add a little chart right here on the side of the screen. All right, that chart says 2 3/4 yards of background. That's right, 2 3/4 yards of background. And we are going to cut 4.5-inch strips. You're going to cut 14 4.5-inch strips. Subcut that down to 120 4.5-inch squares. Then you're going to cut 8 2.5-inch strips. And then you're going to subcut those 8 2.5-inch strips down to 120 2.5-inch squares. Then you're going to cut 5 1.5-inch strips. And then those 5 1.5-inch strips are going to get subcut down into 120 1.5-inch squares. Then you're going to cut 6 1-inch strips. Those 6 1-inch strips are going to get subcut down into 240 1-inch squares. Now, here's the part I really wanted to jump in here and let you know. If you do not want to use the 1-inch squares, don't cut them. Instead, cut 5 more 1.5-inch strips. So that will be a total of 10 1.5-inch strips so that you can get 240 1.5-inch squares. That will replace the 1 inch. But I'm telling you, this pattern is designed around this having this 1 inch to start. But if you don't want to work with 1 inch, just know there is enough in the 2 3/4 yards of fabric to cut it out. And if you don't trust that and you have problems with cutting, go ahead and get 3 yards of fabric in total. That way it makes up for any miscuts and so on and so forth. So again, if you want to not do 1-inch squares, go ahead and cut 5 more 1.5-inch strips instead. Subcut that down so that you'll get another 120. So that's a total of 10 1.5-inch strips for a total of 240 1.5-inch background squares. You need 240 4.5-inch squares of your mixed scrap fabrics. That's what we're going to call them, mixed scrap fabrics. Then you need 240 of your mixed scrap fabrics of your 2.5-inch squares. Then you need 240
1.5
scrap squares, and then you need 240 of your 1-inch scrap squares. So 4.5, 2.5, 1.5, and 1. And again, if you don't want to do the 1, just subtract that completely because your background will fill that in. So here we go. Let's finally sew. Okay, here we are at the sewing machine. I'm going to pick up my 1-inch squares. I'm going to bring them over here in hopes that my big, huge mess right here will stay nicely right here, even though I do have fans on. So my 1-inch squares of my background are just right here in my throat space. And then I'm going to pull over here to the side, and you're going to see me reach across because I have my 1-inch bin of scraps. And what we're going to do is we're going to chain piece the whole lot of these. Now I'm going to start with chain piecing these, and then I'll show you how to put 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 blocks together, and then I'll chain piece the rest of my blocks. But for now, I'm just going to show you So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a 1 inch and I'm going to put it in my left side. That's my background. And then I'm going to take my scrap piece and put it on my right side, which is not my background. And then we're going to grab a second one. I just want a different color here. We're going to have on the bottom of this little 4 patch, we're going to have a scrap piece, and then we're going to have our background right here. So we're going to make a little tiny 4 patch, okay, with 4 1-inch squares, and we're just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. So I know they seem small, but if you watch, you can see they go pretty quick, and we're going to make sure that we have a beautiful 1/4 inch seam first. So to do that, you could also, we're just going to make sure before we start sewing, just so that you guys can see. I'm going to line this 1/4 inch mark up on my ruler right here with my needle, just like this, and go, I'm going to move my my magnetic seam guide over, just like that, and now it's exactly at a 1/4 inch. I'm going to look at it one more time and go, oh yay, look, it's exactly at a 1/4 inch. So there is my 1/4 inch. It's completely lined up. I'm going to make sure, because with these little tiny pieces, it kind of needs to be perfect. So here we go. We're going to start with sewing right here. And now this time my white is going to be on the top, or my background color, which is off-white, actually, more of a creamy off-white. Okay, so I'm going to do that same thing again. I'm going to grab 2 squares, and then I'm going to grab 2 scraps from my bin. And again, I'm going to make sure that it starts with my, this makes it so much easier to chain piece, by the way. 1 wide inch background on the left, on the right is my scrap, then on the left bottom is my scrap, and on the right is my background. So I'm just going to go ahead, right sides together, and I'm going to run those through. I'm going to just chain piece them over and over, just like this. 1/4 inch seams. I'm going to grab 2 more scraps. Here's 2 more scraps. I'm going to grab 2 more of my backgrounds, just like that. I'm going to put them right sides together, just like this. And then I'm going to slide those through. Put these right sides together. Usually I get them all ready first, and then sew some, and then get more ready and sew them. All right, let's do that again. Just going to grab 1 scrap and a second scrap right here. Then we're just going to grab 2 of the backgrounds. We're going to put them right sides together. Just going to pre-put them right sides together so that way they're ready. And they're little, but they do lay on each other nicely, and it makes it pretty easy to sew these up. And then sew that next one. Now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks worth. So for now I'm just going to cut it, but I would continue on with all of these exactly the same. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead, because these are small and I want to keep them together and I don't want to mess them up. I'm going to go ahead and take 1, 2, snip them apart. So there's in sets of 2. Take 2, snip them apart. Take 2, snip them apart, and 2, and snip apart, all the way until the whole pile is done. Then I'm going to go ahead and finger press, because they're so small, we're just going to go ahead and finger press them towards your scrap fabric. So press towards that little scrap piece of fabric. Okay, just like this. And then we're going to put these 2 right sides together, and we're going to butt those 2 seams up. And you can see the pieces are exactly the same size. My seams will be nested, just like this. They're nested. You can see one goes one way, one goes the other. I'm just going to hold that seam and slide it under with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to do that again. For now, I'm just finger pressing. And if you don't want to finger press, you can take a roller like this, hold it open to the side, and just roll it. This might be too big of a roller for this project, but you can do it with a roller as well. So I'm going to go ahead, put those right sides together, and you can see they're nesting nicely. And then I'm just going to hold it down underneath the needle and the machine pull it through. Same thing. They're really small, so it's easier to finger press, honestly. And this is going to be a lot to finger press because we are making 120 blocks. 120 blocks. Yes, that's what we are going to be making. You can make less if you want, but if you want a nice big quilt, 120 blocks is what I have for this pattern. All right, so let's set this right here. And then we're going to do the same thing, right? We're going to press it to the right, which would be my print, and to the left, which is my print. Right sides together, nest those little seams. They're really not that hard or difficult to work with, these little pieces. My fingers aren't near the needle or nothing. Everything sucks right in and does its thing. All right, all 4 of those are now sewn. So now we're just going to open it up and press it up. So if your background is up here on the left, press up towards that background on the left, and you can see they nested right up beautifully. So again, if my background is up to the left, I'm going to press up to the left. And then you can see they nested beautifully. The little tiny squares are so much easier to nest up than bigger squares. All right, see? Look at that, every time. And there's little threads, but that's okay. We'll get those out. One more. And I'm just finger pressing them. Okay, so there's that last one. You can see. Well, technically not the last one because I have a whole stack to sew. But we're going to skip sewing those for a second, and we're going to move on to the 1.5 inch. Okay, because now these little fellers right here are 1.5 inch. So what do you get when you put 1.5, 4 1-inch pieces together? You get a 1.5 inch square. Right now, that's unfinished. And we're going to go ahead now and we're going to grab 4, because we're working 4 blocks at once. We're going to grab 4 1.5 inch squares of what we need. All right, I grabbed what I need. So I need 8 of for 4 blocks here. We need 8 of the 1.5 inch scraps and just 4 of the 1.5 inch background fabrics. Okay, so this is how this is going to work. These are definitely not going to lay flat at the moment, but these are going to go right here in the bottom, just like this. And then our background, the white background that's 1.5 is going to go to the top left. And then on each side of that is going to be a 1.5 inch scrap, just like this. Okay, so now we have a 1.5 inch 4 patch made from 1 inch squares. Then we have the 3 1.5 inch squares to make the 4 patch. So let's put these 2 top ones right sides together, just like this. And we are going to sew these on through. They're 1.5 inch. Now again, if you got rid of the 1 inch squares and you replaced them with your background would go in this bottom corner. So you would sew it the same that I just did these 1 inch squares, except you're just going straight to the 1.5 inch. Bypassing this 1 inch completely, you just need to put your background right here. So it'd just be a 4 patch with 2 backgrounds and 2 scraps. Okay, that's if you're replacing the 1 inch with 1.5 inch. So remember, if you're bypassing this step, just put your background in the spot of this 4 patch. So we're going to sew these right here, and then we're going to take our 4 patch unit. We are going to put that right on top, and you can see it's exactly 1.5 inches, even not being pressed. We're going to sew that through. And then we're going to take the top one again. We're chain piecing. We're going to put those right sides together, just like this, lining everything up. And a 4 patch and a scrap on the bottom, just like this. Do the third one, right sides together. And this bottom one, right sides together. Line it up, sew it through. Top one again, right sides together. 1/4 inch seam, and then the last piece right here, which is really not the last because I have to make 120 blocks. All right, same thing as before. We're going to take them apart in 2s. So here's 2. We're going to snip that apart. Here's 2, snip it apart. Here's 2, snip it apart, and then 2. And you keep going until your whole chain piece is completely snipped apart. We're going to press this towards the scrap piece, and then again we're going to press towards the scrap piece on the bottom. So what you'll have is a unit that looks like this. We're going to put that right sides together. It should be exactly the same size. They're going to nest right here at the top. One's going one way, one's going the other. Everything's lined up. Now I'm going to sew that with a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, again, same thing. Another unit, so I'm just going to finger press for now. One way, finger press the other. Just like this, we're going to put them right sides together. Nest those seams right up, sew them up. Everything's exactly the same size. All right, next one. Pressing it towards my scrap unit on both of them. We're going to put those right sides together, nest that seam. When you know it's nested, when you can't move it, when you can hear it click, that clicking sound, that's those pieces of fabric clicking together. And the last one for at least now, showing you how to do this. We're going to finger press these to the scrap piece, put them right sides together, lock those in place, and sew them through. Now to snip them apart and take a look. And what we're going to do is press them up towards the background again. So every time we do this, we're going to press up towards that background, and you should have a 4 patch within a 4 patch that looks like this. Okay, so again, up towards the background. Again, a nice, beautiful 4 patch. Up towards the background. A nice, beautiful 4 patch. And last one, up towards the background. And a nice, beautiful 4 patch. There we go. So now we are at 2.5 inches. So you guessed it, we are going to grab our parts and pieces that are 2.5 inches. So I'm going to grab enough for 4 blocks that are 2.5 inches. I need 4 of my background squares that are 2.5 inches, and I need 8 of my scrap pieces that are 2.5 inches, because 4 1-inch squares equals 1.5. 4 1.5 inch squares equals 2.5. There's a theme going on here. All right, here are my pieces. So here are my 4 2.5 inch squares. And then we're going to put on both sides a 2.5 inch square, just like this. Did I grab more than I needed? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I did grab more than I needed. Look at that, because every once in a while, you'll grab a piece and 2 will be on it. Okay, so now we're going to do that same procedure, making sure that on our 4 patches that we already made, that your background is up and to the left. Then on your bigger 4 patch, your background is up and to the left. Then you have your scrap fabric to the right. Then the bottom left is your scrap fabric, and the bottom right is your 4-patch unit that you've already created. So now let's make 4-patch units again. So we're just going to take these top 2, right sides together, line them up. Everything looks good. Sew it together with a 1/4 inch seam. Take your bottom unit, just like this, right sides together. It should be exactly 2.5, and I haven't even pressed yet, so you can see it's 2.5 inches. I'm just going to sew that right through. We're going to take the top again. That was 1 block's worth. Just going to slide these through, then slide the bottom through. They're 2.5 inches. Those little 4 patches that we created. Take the top 2, sew them together. Then the bottom 2, sew them together. And last one, top 2 together, bottom 2 together. And you guessed it, we're going to separate in 2s. There's 2, 2, 2, and our last one. Again, we are going to press towards the scrap piece or away from the background. And then we're going to press this one towards the scrap piece away from your original 4-patch. And now you're just going to have a unit that looks like this, right sides together. Again, all we're doing is nesting those seams. Everything should be exactly the same size. Your seams should be in opposite directions. Now we're going to go ahead and sew these together. All right, so we're just going to repeat, finger pressing towards the scrap, finger pressing towards the scrap. I'm just finger pressing all these. You can take it to the iron after every time. But right now, I'm just skipping the ironing step because you guys know how to iron, and we're going to iron them all when I'm done anyway. So I'm sewing these through. Next one, right side, left side. Nest those seams, right sides together. They lay so beautifully. And last one. And to that scrap. We're going to put those right sides together. Nest that seam, making it all nice. Whoop, whoop. Should look good. All right, so what do we get when we separate them? Let's finger press this up towards my background. You should have a beautiful 4.5 inch 4-patch. So up towards the background, it is now a 4.5 inch 4-patch. Press towards that background. Look at that lovely thing right there. And one more. So there we have it. Hence the next number, the 4.5 inchers. So for 4 blocks, I'm going to go ahead and grab 4 of my 4.5 inch backgrounds and 2 of my 4.5 inch scraps. And then we have this. So let's do that. Okay, so I just realized I said 4 for 4 blocks. No, you need 8 for 4 blocks. Anyways, all right, so here's my pieces. They did have, this is the ones I cut on the fold right here. So you can see there is a fold in them, but they look kind of funky, and that's okay. We're just going to use them because that's what we're going to use. So let's just put 4 of these right here. And 4, and then we have 4 down here like that. And then we're going to take our 4.5 inch 4-patch that we made with a 4-patch with a 4-patch. And we're going to have that down here at the bottom. And due to the fact that the block is getting bigger, we just had to move you out of the way. All right, here we go. So to the top left side is your background, always to the top left. Grab that and your 4.5-inch scrap. Put those right sides together. We're going to slide those through 1/4-inch seam. Just going to kind of put those on top of each other for now. And then with your background to the top left of this 4 patch, you're going to put it right sides together with your 4.5-inch scrap unit. We're just going to stick that on top of it and sew it through. Then grab the next 2 because we're chain piecing the entire project. Right sides together, sew it through. Grab that next piece, right sides together. And again, you can press after every step if you wish, but I'm just finger pressing. And so far, everything is lining up beautifully for me, at least. All right, so I'm just going to line these up. Grab the bottom unit, right sides together, line it up. Everything should match exactly because those units should be 4.5 inches if you sew with a 1/4-inch seam. All right, then the last 2 top and bottom. And last one, right sides together. Everything should land perfectly. All right, we're going to separate these in 2s. Oh, that one broke. Interesting. Okay, those go together. It just separated itself. Next 2, those go together. Next 2, those go together. And last 2. So I'm just going to go ahead at this point and finger press towards my scrap fabric and finger press towards my scrap fabric. We're going to put those right sides together. Everything should nest, so they should line right up. They should be exactly the same size. The seams should be going in opposite directions. We're going to sew with a 1/4-inch seam. We're going to hold that center so that it's beautifully matched up. And we're going to grab those next 2. Again, we're going to finger press this to the right, finger press this to the left. Put them right sides together. They should be exactly the same size. You can pin it if you need to, but I just hold my finger on that seam and then line up this end. All right, next, towards the scrap and towards the scrap. Right sides together. I'm just holding at that seam. Everything's staying nicely nested up. And the last one, we're just going to finger press towards the scrap. Finger press towards the scrap. Right sides together. They should be exactly the same size. Look at that. Perfect. Hold that seam so that it stays nicely nested up. And there we have 4 blocks. Let's separate them. We're just going to give them a finger press up towards that background. And there is a block that I need to adjust. This one got off. So you can see this much off bothers me. So I'm going to pluck that out. So I'm just going to lay that right here on my lap for a second. Oh, that one's perfect. Must have just not been paying attention trying to talk to you guys. So there's another one. This is an 8.5-inch block at this moment. There we go. That one's perfect. And the last one. Oh, yeah, that's fine. It's not perfect, but it's not perfect. So we're just going to leave that. But this one, we're just going to unstitch it right here, about an inch both ways of the seam, and I'm just going to adjust that because that bothers me. And you get to see it right here in real time. All right, so come on, get in there. Sometimes they don't want to break open. There we go. And then just going to unstitch a little bit more. There we go. About an inch both ways, just so that I can nest those back together. And I'm going to sew the opposite way now, holding that seam together so that it locks. And I'm going to go the opposite direction now. And that's as close as it's going to get for being re-sewn, but that's better than it was. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to press all these. And you guys can see I'm not perfect by no means. So these are my blocks. I'm going to press them and then I'm going to show you what to do next. Okay, so now I have 4 blocks. 1 there, 2, 3, and 4. Now, at this point, you don't have to do this next step. You can wait to the end and lay your whole quilt out and do as you wish. But for my pattern, we're going to take these 4 blocks and we're going to have 1 going this way. Then you're going to rotate 1. Then you're going to rotate 1. And then you're going to rotate 1. Just like this. Okay? And what I'm going to do is swap this one and this one. Only because there was 2 reds right next to each other. So I'm going to take these 4 blocks now, and I'm going to put these right sides together, just like this, and like this. And here you're going to see that these seams are not in opposite directions. They are all going the same direction. So you could either flip the seam as you sew. Every time you get to a junction, just flip that seam as you sew, and then when you press again, you just press them down. I've done that on many, many, many quilts. There's nothing really wrong with flipping the seam, but there's nothing also that helps me know which block needs to be pressed upwards and which block needs to be pressed downwards, and so on and so forth. So we're going to sew these right sides together with a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm going to flip my seams. So here is the layout, just like this. So let's go sew these up. I sew right up to that seam, and then I flip it down. So I'm just flipping them down. I could feel it nest. This little last 1 incher is kind of hard to do, but we're going to do it. I'll slide this next set through. And just like I said, this little 1 incher is a little bit harder to do, but I'm going to do it. You could wait to lay out your whole entire quilt. You could also use a stiletto, which I actually have one. I should be using it, right? To hold the piece as you sew up to it. There's nothing wrong with having those flipped seams. All right, so now one is going to go one direction, just like this. Just going to push that one to the left or to the right and this one to the left for now. And then I'm going to put them right sides together. And now I'm going to sew down this side, and I'm just going to flip the seams and hold them with my stiletto as I go. Doesn't really slow me down, really, because I'm still stopping at each seam anyway to nest them up. Just going to with these now. Lining this up. And then these ones. And this is just nesting the seam. You can lay them flat. If you get them on top of each other, they should go right. But you could also press your seams open, and then you don't have to worry about any of that. But that's up to you how you press. Everybody presses differently. I'm going to open this up now, and I'm going to take it over to the iron, and we're going to give it a good press, and then we will have ourselves a 16-inch block. All right, here we have a 16.5-inch block. We're just going to measure to make sure. Yep, 16.5 that way, 16.5 that way. That is our 16.5-inch block. And we're going to go ahead, we're going to make 120 of these smaller blocks, and then we are going to put them together so that we have, I forgot how many because I'm not near my chart of the big blocks because I don't feel like doing math. So I peeked at my chart. It's 30 big blocks. So we're going to make 120 8.5-inch blocks and then put those together, and then it's going to turn out into 30 big blocks so that we can do 5 across by 6 down. Doesn't this look awesome? So to spare you hours upon hours of video footage, I'm going to go ahead now and I am going to just chain piece all of this. I'm not even going to do it in time lapse. I'm just going to chain piece the rest of my blocks. So let's get to sparing you the making of all the rest of the blocks, and I will see you when they are all put together so that we can piece the rows together and put the quilt top together. Yay! Okay, so I've gone and made 30 blocks. So I have all 30 scrappy blocks. And I have to say, at this point, so I'm just going to say it out loud. I'm not perfect, and I didn't think about the whole seam pressing thing. I told you press this way, press that way, whatever way you want to press. In all honesty, I don't like to press my seams open, but for this project, for this quilt, this lovely scrappy quilt, I kind of think I should have pressed all the seams open. It would have made things easier. Not to say that the blocks aren't flat. They are flat. As you can see, the seams go whatever way they want. Problem with that is there's a couple that the seams had to be turned. And when you flip one seam and it's in a short distance, you know, and you have to flip it the other way to make it match and nest your seams up, it creates just a little bit of bulk behind it. It's not a deal breaker. It's not a quilt. It's not a quilt problem. It's not gonna affect anything. You won't even feel it when you like lay on the quilt when it's finished, but it's not good enough for me. So I just want to make sure that I let you guys know I'm not perfect, and I didn't think about, oh, hey, how am I going to tell everybody to press these seams? And when I started telling you how to make the block, I'm like, oh, let's press this way, that way, whatever. I've made enough quilts to know that inside the quilt, nobody's ever going to see it. Whatever's going to happen, happens. But if I was to go back and start all 120 of the small blocks to make 30 of these big blocks, I would have definitely pressed all the seams open. So that one is up to you. Again, you can just press them all willy-nilly, whatever way works, one side or the other, and then, you know, deal with just a couple little turning seams because, like I said, they don't all match up perfectly. But the seams do nest, and that's nice. But pressing them open probably would have allowed for a little bit more calming on the inside of the quilt. But it's a scrappy quilt. It's being thrown together for you guys to see and for me to go, oh, wow, hey, this looks cool. Because guess what? It's starting to look really cool. So let's make it look even better by taking all these blocks. I'm going to lay them out. The only reason why I'm going to lay them out is because I when you start putting the blocks together side by side like this, as you can see, 4 colors come together, and I want to make sure that no 2 of the same fabrics, because I did have to use some repeats. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of 4.5-inch squares in my bin, so there's quite a few repeats of stuff randomly on the 4.5-inch, which was the last size. So I want to make sure when I lay it out that I have no 2 same fabrics touching each other. That's about it. Other than that, if I really didn't care to have 2 matching, I would just start sewing them in row 5 across by 6 down. So that's what we're going to go lay these on the living room floor at 5 across, 6 down. I'm going to really look at it. I'm going to have my husband really look at it. We're going to go, okay, nothing matches. I'm going to mark them, stack them, and bring them in here. And we're going to sew the rows together. And again, since I didn't press anything open, these mostly are pressed to the dark. So this seam that's going to match with the next one on the next block, those should nest. But these ones will probably not. So one's going to have to get flipped one way and one the other, which is okay. Again, flipping the seam does not mean you did a horrible job. It just means, you know, there's a little bit more bulk inside the quilt, but that's okay because the blocks are flat. Everything's laying nicely, and who is really going to look inside your quilt? So just wanted to say that out loud. Again, I'm not perfect. I don't know which way to press them, and I really don't want to go through everything and say, oh, this one's going to be the right, this one's going to be the left, make 2 piles because one's going to be pressed this way and one's going to be pressed this way. That's too much work. Just press your seams whatever way you feel like it. Flip them if you have to. Press them flat. Bam. It gets the quilt's blocks done faster. So let's go lay this out. So now all I need to do, I have little marks on them. I put little clips. Now I just need to sew the rows together like any other quilt. And then the next time you see this quilt top, it shall be ready for borders, which I already have disappeared. I cut 2.5-inch strips for border number 1. And then for border number 2, I'm going to go ahead and cut like a 5-inch strip of something, 5-inch strips of something that's fun and exciting and goes with all of this. But border number 1 is going to be the background fabric, 2.5 inches. And then border number 2 is just going to be something that goes with it. So the next time you see this quilt top, it's going to be a quilt top. Stay tuned. And would you look at that? The 4-patch plus quilt is complete. I not only made the top, I completed the quilt, just so you guys can see the whole thing finished. So this is the 4-patch plus. Very simple to make. Again, I did come back and tell you, pressing the seams open, but when I was quilting it, you can't tell. It wasn't a big deal, but it's not a deal breaker. Just find the way you want to press your seams and press them that way because, again, mine lays perfectly flat. I had no problem. It quilted up beautifully. I added a 2.5-inch border all the way around first, which is my stopping border, and I did it in my background fabric. And then I did a 5-inch border all the way around, and it came out great. And then I bound it with what was left over from the back fabric and the border fabric. And it's actually specially bound just perfectly because I did something custom with it. So I'm going to go ahead and bring you forward so that you can see the whole thing. And then I'll show you the back because I did something special with the back too. And that's it. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I'm going to bring you up so that you can see everything. And hopefully you have fun making yourself a 4-patch plus quilt. Future editing Tiffany here. I just thought I would tell you because I totally forgot, and I always forget in every video, and it's not my fault, trust me. I get so busy and trying to rush things to make a video and a good quality video, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, where am I getting at here? The sizes. This quilt makes, without any borders, an 80 by 96 inch quilt. And you can make as many blocks or as little blocks as you want. That's totally up to you. It's fun. If you want to add one border, it is 84 by 101, and that's with one 2.5 inch border just to like stop it. And that's why I'm standing in front of it so you can see. And then if you want to add two borders like I did, it's 93 by 110, and that's with a 5 inch final border. Once it's quilted, I quilted it, and you lose size with quilting if you didn't know. It comes out to 92.5 by 108.5. So it's the perfect queen size quilt for the perfect queen size bed. So I just thought I would throw this in there real quick to let you know because I always forget to tell you. So there that is. Anyways, back to the video. And if you make this, this is an easy tip to remember. 1 plus 1 equals 1.5 in the quilting world. So 4 ones equal 1.5. 4 1.5s equal 2.5. 4 2.5s equal a 4.5. And it creates a plus sign. How fun is that? Easy to remember. Here's my special back. The top and bottom, that's how you know what's top and bottom, because I put a border on the top and bottom. But I took my leftover block that I showed you guys how to make in the beginning of this video, and I put it in the center of the back of the quilt. Actually kind of comes down just a little. No, it's actually center. No, I don't know. Whatever. but it was so much fun. Let's take a closer look.